To begin this journey, let's start where we need to start, and that's with Jesus at the center, right? I'm going to tell a story. It's a story actually that's recorded in the Gospel of Matthew. It happened the last week of Jesus' life, while he's in Jerusalem, before he goes to the cross. So it's during this intense week in which Jesus is teaching his disciples their final lessons, engaging with the religious leaders of Jerusalem, and knowing fully well that at the end of this week, he will take literally the covenant breaking. Just another word for the word sin. Simply means to break covenant. Jesus will take the sins or the covenant breaking of the world literally upon his shoulders as he goes to the cross. Well, during this week, there's an episode that happens. Jesus is doing his business, walking around and mingling with people in the city of Jerusalem around Passover times, just before Passover. And of course, at Jerusalem, in that ancient world, as Passover neared, the population of Jerusalem would literally swell and double or triple because of all the pilgrims coming from around the lands of Galilee and Judea to come and celebrate Passover. It's an intense time, it's a festive time, it's a crowded time, and it's a dangerous time, because at this point in history, Rome is in charge. And Pilate, with a number of soldiers, has moved from the coast into town for this festive occasion, because he knows this is also a time where Jewish political sensibilities can get very heightened, and where the spirit of revolution can breed in the air. And Pilate's nervous about that. So it's a tense time as well. In the midst of this sort of setting, we're told that in Matthew chapter 22, there's an instance when a religious leader, in fact, a number of them, come to Jesus and ask him a question. Now, if we're not careful, if we're not clear about the contextual background of this sort of moment in Jesus' life, we might just think that it's sort of a group of rabbis and scribes who are sort of curious, and they know Jesus is a wise teacher, so they're coming for some instruction. But that's not the case at all. These religious leaders see Jesus as a threat. And they know that one of the quickest ways to quell a movement, to take a religious prophet like Jesus who's got this big movement growing, and to sort of simmer things down and cause them to lose a lot of followers very quickly. Well, they know how to do that in this culture. This is an honor-shame culture. In this culture, all you really have to do is to ask that prophet, that teacher, a question in public, surrounded by his followers, and to ask the right question, a question that there's really no way out of. There's no good answer. In other words, you try to ask an embarrassing question that leaves that teacher shamed in public. And so they thought long and hard about what kind of question would do that. And they finally came up with the perfect one. It was this: "Good teacher, Rabbi, tell us, what is the greatest commandment in all the law?" That is not a simple, innocuous question in ancient Judaism. Because see, what the Jewish religious leaders know is there's roughly, by rabbinic count, 613 commandments in the Old Testament. So to ask a teacher which is the greatest means when they answer you with one, you literally have 612 others that you can come back with, make a better case for one of the others, and show them to be not as wise as their followers might think they are. It's a setup. It's a challenge to Jesus' authority. So when Jesus is asked this question, he knows his answer. And it comes pretty quickly. It comes right out of Deuteronomy, chapter 6, verse 5. And Jesus says, the greatest commandment, well, that would be this one: love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your mind, and all your strength. Now look, this part of text here, right out of Deuteronomy 6, is coming from the Shema, one of the greatest Jewish slogans. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one, and you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and all your soul and all your mind. Like, it's one of the greatest commandments. And I'm sure the Jewish leaders weren't thrilled that he picked that important of a one, but I think they probably thought that they can still find another one to challenge Jesus, make a better case, and have Jesus walk away shamed that day, losing followers. Which is why I suspect that when Jesus uttered that first response And as they were about ready to jump in and challenge him, I can just imagine Jesus going, oh, wait a minute. And the second one is just like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. Now here Jesus picks from Leviticus chapter 19, verse 18. Another very important law of the 613. But there's still 611 that these Jewish religious leaders can use to confront Jesus, challenge him, and cause him to lose face. Which is why I think Jesus probably held his hand up for a third time. So wait a minute. And on these two commandments, he says, depend all the law and the prophets. In those two verses, Jesus says, he just summed up all 613 commandments. There's nothing left to be said. And it says that when the Jewish religious leaders heard this response, and several others, to questions they were trying to trip Jesus up with that day, that they were silenced. They had no response, and they walked away. This was a key moment in Jesus being challenged around his movement and Jesus coming out victorious. We can learn a number of things from this episode. Among them being that it never hurts to be the Son of God when you're in a debate, that's for sure. But even more importantly is this question. Why, when Jesus is posed the question of the greatest commandment, why is it that he says, actually all the commandments can be summed up with just two? Love God, love others. Notice love is at the center of both of those. It almost seems like Jesus thinks that love is what everything is about when it comes to God. Why? Why? Why is love the greatest commandment? Right? Why is it the case that after Jesus gives this teaching and ends up going to the cross demonstrating his love for us, rising again to defeat our enemies, ascending to heaven, and beginning his church, why is it then in the rest of the New Testament we often find it coming back to love again and again and again? Listen to these words of the Apostle Paul. Romans chapter 13, verses 10 through 12. Paul says this, owe no one anything except to love one another. Quoting from Jesus' second of the two great commandments. Owe no one anything except to love one another. For Paul says the one who loves another has fulfilled the law. All the law, right? So Jesus' words are simply being remembered and re-paraphrased by Paul here. For one who does love has fulfilled all the law. The commandments like do not commit adultery, do not commit murder, you shall not steal, you shall not covet, and any other commandment, Paul says, are summed up with these words, love your neighbor as yourself. Leviticus 19:18 once again. So Paul says, and he ends it with this, love does no wrong to a neighbor. Therefore, love is the fulfillment of the law. Paul takes Jesus' words, repackages them, resummarizes them, and re-emphasizes that to love another is to do everything God has ever asked us to do. Later, in 1 Corinthians 13, the great love chapter, Paul puts it this way. If I speak in tongues of humans or of angels, but do not have love, I am a noisy gong or a clanging cymbal. And if I have prophetic powers, and I understand all the mysteries, and all knowledge, and I have all faith, so as to move mountains, but I don't have love, I'm nothing. And if I give away all my possessions, if I hand my own body over to be burned, to be martyred for Jesus, but I do not have love, I gain nothing. Love is patient. Now Paul begins to define what he's talking about. Listen to the way he talks about the kind of love that Jesus said is at the center of everything. Love is patient. Love is kind. It's not envious, not boastful. It's not arrogant or rude. It doesn't insist on its own way. Never insists on having its own way. Rather, it looks towards others. It's not irritable. It's not boastful. It does not rejoice in wrongdoing, but rather it rejoices in the truth. It bears all things. It believes all things. It hopes all things for others. And it endures all things. That means suffering, and that means pain. Paul says, love never fails. It's not the kind of thing that can fail. And he goes on to talk about the importance of love until he finally comes to these words, the very last sentence of this chapter, when he says this. These three things then last forever. Three things are eternal: faith, hope, and love. But then to end the chapter, Paul says, and yet the greatest of these three things, which are very great, the greatest of these three is love. Augustine, who lives a few centuries after Paul, trying to summarize the heart of love that's there for Jesus and the center of love at the teachings of Paul, Augustine puts it simply this way. If there's ever a point in your life when you're wondering, God, what should I do? Lord, I need guidance. Augustine says, well, it's really simple. Love, and then do anything you want to do. Love, Paul says, fulfills the law. Love, Jesus said, is the greatest commandment. Now we know this as Christians. We for centuries and centuries have been told and been telling others that love is at the center. But what I want to do is stop for a minute and ask the question again. Why? Why is love the greatest commandment? Why does love fulfill the law? Why is it that we can love and then do anything else we want? Why is love the greatest of the three eternal qualities that last forever: faith, hope, and love? Why love?